All right, hello everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us for this month's In Search of Truth program hosted by the Venda Museum. My name is Emma Larson, and I'm pleased, along with the rest of my wonderful colleagues on the In Search of Truth Student Council, to welcome Krystyn Lambert as our special guest for today's exciting discussion. Krystyn Lambert is a mentalist, theatrical medium, practicing witch, and one of the most recognized females in the world of magic. Starting to perform publicly when she was only 12 years old, Krystyn has enjoyed extensive domestic and international television appearances, has performed solo acts in Criss Angel's live show in Las Vegas, and currently hosts programs that combine witchcraft with Krystyn's uncanny ability to delve into the minds of audience members. Her seances creatively strive to intertwine mentalism and spiritual phenomena. In addition to practicing her magic live, Krystyn also writes a recurring column for Genii Magazine, magic's premier publication. Influenced by her degree in philosophy from UCLA, Krystyn's writing often addresses the metaphysical aspects of theater and asks how magicians can elevate their magic beyond merely executing tricks into true performance art. Today's program is going to feature a 45-minute discussion with Krystyn Lambert, moderated by our student council member, Ashla Chavez-Rosano, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A moderated by another council member, Magana Halby. Viewers, we invite you to type your questions into the Q&A found at the bottom of your Zoom screen at any point during the program. Just please remember to keep your questions as clear and concise as possible. Krystyn Lambert, it is a pleasure and privilege to have you with us this afternoon. On behalf of the entire In Search of Truth Student Council, thank you so much for joining us. We also extend our thanks to Susan Horowitz and Rick Feldman for generously supporting discussion series at the Venda Museum. Ashla, I think we are ready to begin.
Cool. Thank you so much, Emma. My name is Ashla. I will be today's discussion moderator. And on behalf of the Venda Museum, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to Krystyn Lambert for joining us for In Search of Truth today. To begin, Lexi has a question that concerns your personal background and your family history and what led you to become interested in the world of magic and mysticism.
Yes, okay, well, thank you, Ashla, and hello again. So my question is, as a descendant of a woman persecuted for possibly practicing magic during the 17th century's Scottish witch trials, how would you describe your family or personal legacy?
First of all, hi, thank you everyone. I'm Krystyn Lambert. I'm so honored to be here, and thank you for that question. So basically, witchcraft has a very bad rap in society. We tend to think of these like evil hags and Disney evil stepmothers, and we have these kind of Wizard of Oz views of witches, which are very far from the truth. And really with the religious propaganda around 1440, I guess, is probably about when it started. These women who were essentially a form of pagan refused to follow the doctrines of the church. And so they definitely became the subject of a lot of persecutions. And then that writing that people started at that time really expanded after the Black Plague, because now we have nearly 1/3 of all of Europe the population's been wiped out, and witches served as this wonderful scapegoat for why that happened. And so really at that time, anyone and everyone could have been persecuted for being a witch. They said that witches were in league with Satan. They would say that Satan made these women do these things, which doesn't actually make sense with the doctrines of witchcraft, because that's all about free will. And if the devil made you do it, it's not witchcraft, if that makes sense. I mean, Satanism is its whole other thing, and it's a little bit separate from the witchcraft that I'm speaking about currently. But yeah, so, if you denied a man your bed, if you gave someone a dirty look, if if someone's crops didn't grow the right way, then, oh, well, it's that woman over there. And, so between, 1600s, 1700s, around 50,000 people were executed for being witches, 80% of whom were women, and most weren't actually witches. So it's hard to say whether or not Catherine Key, who's my many, many, many greats grandmother, it's hard to say whether or not she actively was a witch. And a lot of people, the people who practiced witchcraft at the time, a lot of it was like midwifery, herbalism, early medicine that was very scary to those who were in power. And similarly, when you have these women, witchcraft is all about your, as I said, free will and manifesting your desires. And when you have women who are just more concerned with kind of doing what they want, as opposed to following any certain nihilistic doctrine, they're going to be a threat to the patriarchy. And so, let's kill them off. So that's, so whether or not my direct descendant was actually a witch, regardless, she did something that someone didn't like in the patriarchal system. And, that is my legacy. And as a witch currently, it's all about how can I dismantle or work to dismantle systemic oppression and the patriarchy. And that's really what I'm interested in doing with my magic as well, because early in my magic career, I very much was doing what I was told, and I was wearing what I was told to wear, and I was doing the kind of things that I was told to do. And I mean, yes, I had my own influence. It's not like I was just a puppet, but at the same time, a lot of the stuff was very much like very oriented toward male gaze. And it's, this kind of stuff that I'm just currently trying to break away from as much as possible, and not to criticize my history and my past in magic, but, magic is primarily made up of old white men. And so, as a young woman, it was very challenging to kind of find my own direction. And it took a long time in order to do so.
It's really interesting what you say about how like the theatrical icon of witches and like the religious propaganda that you described is like, I don't know, really a way that people can like implicitly instill these like values into our like subconscious, and like the fear that we have for this idea of like the witch and like the mystic and this like an evil woman can really just uphold like structures of power that don't have like anything to do with, I don't know, like the unknown, and it's all like illusion, which is really interesting. Yeah. And it's also cool to hear like how you play with the icon of a witch in your own work as well, like both like as a personally like practicing one and also as someone who is using this as like it's your career. So I think Emma has a really good follow-up question that talks about like how this background that's both like your heritage and like something that you practice like religiously informs your career and like the development and your training in this field.
Yeah, I want to know more about like the nitty gritty of like the training or like background. Like, what did you have to do, accomplish, study, read, like to be able to perform the magic that you do? Because like, if anyone like seen Krystyn's videos, there are some on YouTube. Like, it's pretty incredible. So like, how does one get there?
Yes, it is. It's interesting because I first got interested in magic when I was very young. My grandfather showed me a card trick when I was like 4 or 5, and I was so fascinated with that. And then when I was 10 years old, my mother had breast cancer, and she gifted me magic as a way to like distract me from everything that was going on. She's recovered fine, for the record, but she gifted me lots of different crafts, and magic was one of many things, but it was what I gripped onto the most. And I was so interested in, just like, I think at that age, it was kind of like the trickster element was really compelling to me. I just liked kind of like having one up on people, I guess, for a lack of a better phrase. And I think that's the way a lot of people get into magic. And it gives you a sense of power of, I know something you don't know. And that's very appealing to a lot of people. What people don't realize is that once you get past the kind of press a button, the magic happens kind of tricks, and you start getting into skill and sleight of hand and all of that. You know, it's a lot of toil and it's a lot of practice, and it's a lot of locking yourself in your room for 5 hours at a time, practicing the same magic move over and over to kind of get it smooth. So that no one sees what you're actually doing. And so it's a very solitary experience. And also it's completely male dominated. There are very, very few women. And when I joined the Magic Castle Junior program at age 12, there were 3 girls. One was a ventriloquist, one was a juggler, and I was the magician. And I'm an awkward prepubescent 12-year-old, and they're all kind of awkward boys. And it was very uncomfortable, and it was very challenging. And, that's where you get into a lot of it. Like, people kind of didn't know what to do with me. When I first joined the junior program, I was doing a trick primarily doing a trick called the linking rings, which are these big metal hoops, and they interlink and unlink. And I was told, like, yeah, you can wear like a long black dress and just do the rings. And I was 12 and I was obsessed with fantasy and Lord of the Rings, and I wanted to be this like elven fairy, and no one kind of like knew what to do with that. I was a fairy. That was my first performance at the Magic Castle. There's footage somewhere, embarrassingly, I'm sure. But from there, I kind of evolved into more of like using pop music and, dancing around. And it kind of became a more serious character, more of like a pop star kind of vibe, which didn't really feel authentic to me, but it was like winning competitions, and magic competitions are a big deal for the teens in magic. And so, again, it's like this confusing place of, oh, she's just winning because she's a girl. No, she's winning because she's actually doing very difficult magic, and she's doing it well. So it was always very challenging socially in magic. And I know that's not your question. You're asking more about the training, but really it's just the toil of learning all of the sleight of hand. If you're doing card tricks, you've got to commit to that. And like, that's one rabbit hole. If you're doing coin tricks, that's another rabbit hole. And what I have evolved into is doing mentalism, as you said in my introduction, which is not, I do sleight of hand in my show, but primarily it's like sleight of mind. And so I'm like employing psychological subtleties to make you think one thing is happening when indeed another thing is. And that kind of like verbal manipulation is just what's most interesting to me in magic. It's got the most crossover with witchcraft, which is obviously a big part of my life. And so it's been the most fulfilling for me. And it seems the least like tricky. You know what I'm saying?
That's really interesting. Sorry. That's a really interesting concept about like, I don't know, the ways that you can like play with like the psychological, like, or the existing like psyches of your audiences, if that makes sense. So I have kind of a follow-up question about that. Mysticism and occultism are rooted in this concept, or in the supernatural concepts of like extrasensory perception, or like a sixth sense, or that which is like beyond our understanding of the material realm. And so I was wondering like what your notion of truth is, like as you play along with like this threshold of different states of consciousness and like challenge your audience's perceptions of reality based on like conscious and things like that.
That's a very interesting question. So it's really, it's about creating this impression of one thing is happening because I'm telling you that I'm doing something, but then I'm really doing something else, or I'm telling the audience that the spectator in question is perceiving things one way, but I'm using verbal manipulation with them to think another. And so there's a lot of like dual reality between what the audience is, experiencing, what the spectator on stage is experiencing, and what I am doing behind the scenes. And I don't use any stooges or like no one's in on anything. And so for me, it's just like mental gymnastics, the whole show, to like, make sure that this is veiled and this is, being perceived as one way and I'm addressing it one way when in fact it's another. And so kind of like making sure, keeping track of all the different moving parts intellectually to me is just fascinating. And the fact that so many things in my show can go wrong because it's not relying on my skill sleight of hand. The card will always turn from red to black because it's in my hands. I'm not doing that kind of thing. It's reliant on my spectators' interpretation of things. And so it's very much about my verbal acumen in order to control the situation. And then to address the first part of your question, I do infuse some witchy kind of things into the show. I'll do like readings essentially, where I'm talking about someone's life or something that they might be wondering about in their life, or based on them choosing a certain tarot card in the show, or based on them having a certain kind of dream, I'm able to tell them things about themselves that they didn't think anyone knew. And so there are kind of witchy elements intertwined into, what is also magic and verbal manipulation. So there's kind of a blend of everything, which for me does everything to shatter people's perceptions of what is real and shatter their perceptions of reality. Because, magic is making the impossible possible. So by nature of that, we have to ground what we're doing in reality, because you have to know how, like that's why magic with kids can sometimes be confusing, because everything is magic to them. But as an adult, or at least, a little bit older, you realize the way the world works. And then when something changes your perception about the way the world works, now we have the impossible becoming possible. Now we have magic happening. And so everything has to be very fair and very real in order for it to be impressive and make people think twice about the way the world works for them.
It's really cool to hear about, like, I don't know, the ways that your interaction with audiences has like developed over time, especially knowing that magic has played like a variety of roles in your life, like personally, like as a child and then like as a young woman. But Gianna has a really good question that kind of talks more about like the trajectory of your career and like your personal growth within it.
Yes, thank you, Ashla. When I was reading your biography and also during this call, I noticed that you mentioned the fact that you've been participating in public appearances since the age of 12. Given the fact that you've been practicing in your profession from such a young age, has there been any remarkable changes or growth in the way that you perceive your line of work, and not just in the level of trick, but also on a deeper level and more personal?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's always with art a natural progression of your interaction with it and the way you perceive yourself within it. Because I was saying, like, I was a fairy, I was a pop star. When I was in Criss Angel show, I was like, kind of this femme fatale. And so I've had like a lot of different personas within magic, which I think is, natural. But for me, it's really been about like this, peeling away the layers of, well, who am I and what is fulfilling to me? Because, with a lot of these iterations of my work, there's always been kind of this feeling of, yeah, but this isn't like me. This isn't real. And there's nothing wrong with playing a character, and there's nothing wrong with not being you. But as far as this being my artistic output, I wanted it to be a more accurate representation. And so, after I tore my Achilles in the upside down straitjacket in Criss Angel show, I kind of took some time to figure things out. And I really wanted to figure out, who is Krystyn and what does she want to be, and who am I, what's going on? And so, I took time, and that's when I returned to this notion of witchcraft that had been peripherally in my worlds, because when I first joined Criss Angel's show, I had done a lot of magic, but I hadn't really been like a very powerful, fierce performer. I'd kind of just been doing my own thing, and yeah, it was good, but it wasn't like the next level of like what you need to be for Cirque du Soleil or whatever. And so I worked with this Juilliard acting coach, and she told me about this Greco-Roman goddess who I could kind of summon and channel, and that way I could embody this other character, which is a very common acting technique. But I was so desperate to get better that I indulged her and started to worship this Greco-Roman goddess Hecate. And do I believe that this figure is actively participating in my life? Probably not, but ceremony plays a large role in the psyche, how we process information. And so it was very much a way for me to, when I did this pre-show chant, I got stronger. When I would, leave an offering, things got better because I was processing everything on a different level. I was thinking things through on a different level. And that's largely how witchcraft works. Ceremony.
I love that you talk about ceremony. Something I think about, like, honestly, every single day is the idea of ritual. Like whether it be small rituals, like, I don't know, brushing your hair, which I think is like kind of like a feminine thing. Or even like, I think a lot about like birthday parties and like the act of singing around a cake and blowing out candles and making a wish and having it be this like communal activity, and like the ways that this like acts as like a pillar in our lives is super interesting. As a side note, there's this, I suppose she's an Instagram influencer, but she's also an artist and a writer named Gabby Abrao, who goes by Swoon on Instagram. And she talks a lot about the power of ritual, especially in like in our contemporary world and like in small ways, that I think like maybe you'd be really interested in, just as a side note. But anyway, so we've talked about like kind of like your personal sense of self in relation to your like persona as you are performing and acting. And I think Natalie has a really great question about the role of like a quote unquote witch, like in society, and also as like a feminist ideal and a challenge to like existing spheres of power and oppression, honestly. So Natalie, if you'd like to.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Krystyn, as you mentioned towards the beginning of our conversation, historically, witch has been a label applied to women deemed threatening to patriarchal power structures. However, there's also, of course, a long history of women and more recently, queer folks and people of color reclaiming this identity as a form of resistance. So I'm wondering, to what extent do you think we can consider witchcraft an alternative, feminist or otherwise, an alternative to mainstream, often misogynistic modes of knowledge production?
Yeah, 100% it is. No doubt about it, because, being a witch means to boldly and unapologetically embrace nature, heal yourself, heal your community, and respect seen and unseen realms, and the freedom to be your most authentic self. And I think that's really what we need so much of right now, when we're in this society that is begging us to think one way, or be in line with some kind of dogma. And witchcraft is really the antithesis to that, and is all about finding your own path. And yes, you do so communally. It's not a solitary practice entirely, but it's very much about finding what feels right to you and doing what's right for you, and questioning things, as opposed to simply accepting the norms and what the patriarchy has laid before us. So I think it's all about just embracing yourself, and the more we can be stewards of the land, the better. And I think that's something that's so missing in our current, capitalistic patriarchal structure. And I think that witchcraft is really just about like embracing all of that in a more I think it's now reaching people in a more compelling way because things have become kind of so explosive in terms of the divisions in the country, climate change, all of the recent Supreme Court rulings that have been, crippling to a lot of people. We're really going through it. And so it's important to find something that's fulfilling to you, and witchcraft can be that.
Kind of like playing along or continuing with this idea of like existing powers, like influence and stuff. Megana has a cool question about like skepticism in magic and like the critique of your work, and like maybe how this could play into I don't know, resistance against those sorts of things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so thanks, Asha. So this was a combination of Emma and I's question. So I think I'm going to group them together. But what would you say to non-believers or critics who claim that the magic, medium, and mysticism you embody is fake or untrue? And how do you respond to skepticism about the practice of psychic and magic? Does personal resistance negatively affect your performance from working? Loaded question, sorry.
I love this question. So, my shows, my performances blend witchcraft with magic. And so, you know, there has been some tension when I do like a seance where people say, well, why are you even bothering to do any wit or any magic when you should just do it all for real? And I've had people say the opposite. And so I understand that it does get sticky when you introduce magic. And I think that there's nothing wrong with blurring the line. I think that that's what makes us question things all the more. So it's ultimately more intellectually productive for the audience. But I do understand not having a clear-cut answer can be very frustrating for people. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. As far as witchcraft and skepticism, you know, I understand when you see someone who claims to be a witch or they're a medium and they're, you know, kind of taking advantage of someone who's in grief because they just lost someone, like that is, I don't think that's a good thing. You know, there are problems within the community, or, you know, these kind of like corner psychics who are just going to say their script, and you just happen to be sitting there and that's $20 and go to the ATM if you want more. And, you know, there are charlatans out there, but there are in every field. But as far as witchcraft and people who are genuinely witches, I don't see any conflict between skepticism and witchcraft, because you know, witchcraft is mostly works psychologically. It mostly works because of ceremony in the psyche, like I was saying. It works, you know, what is tarot? Oh, well, it's a lens through which to view a situation. What does my question look like through the lens of the Eight of Cups or Temperance or whatever I drew? And so it's you're interpreting the cards and essentially gaining meaning. Now, I personally feel I'm an intuitive person and I am good with mental gymnastics, and I'm able to kind of, you know, intuit things about people or about the situation that I'm being offered with the cards. And so, you know, does that mean that I'm a psychic? You know, it's ambiguous. You know what I mean? Like I'm not sure, and I don't need to be. Because, you know, fundamentally, witchcraft is centered around individuality and the rites and practices that are as old as humanity itself, which function based off of ritual, which function, you know, this crystal doesn't emit any more vibrations than any other material on earth, but because I have an intention that I link to it, and when I touch it, I think of my intention, and thus I'm going to live that all the more. Well, now that's the magic. You know, people say, well, astrology is not real. Well, nothing's real. Your name is literally made of gibberish that you only respond to because you crave identity and structure, you know? So it's like a lot of this stuff, I think people blow it up as this whole like, oh, that's the, you know, supernatural, and that's the these people are crazy, they believe in all this craziness. And granted, there is something to be said for feeling in tune with the universe. The more I study mycology, the more I go on nature walks and collect sticks that I turn into artwork, the more I feel in tune with the earth. And that's being a steward of the land, as I was talking about earlier, which is also core to witchcraft. And so does that mean that I can't also be into science? No, not at all. I think they are very compatible.
I love that idea of like associations playing such a distinct role in the concepts of witchcraft and like manifestation and things like that. The artist who I was referencing earlier, Gabby Abreu, also talks about spell casting and things like that, and how people have like a lot of people might use like rose quartz or something to symbolize like love, or I don't know, I'm not really familiar with stones like amethyst to be protection or something like that. But for her, she talks about how like if she were to cast a spell, she wouldn't use a stone, she would use like a photo of her family to symbolize like protection or something like that. And it's all about like the potency of like this symbols and the personal archetypes you have for yourself. Yeah, definitely. And it's really cool to see how like witchcraft is truthfully like such an independent experience, I think, and it's the way that you relate to the world and like perceive it and like use that I don't know, for your own practice. At least that's my interpretation of it.
Absolutely.
But thank you. So Emma has a really cool question about kind of like your personal experience further and like performance versus practice and things like that. I think it's a good continuation of this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, something that it like really strikes me about the line of work that you're in is how intertwined with like your everyday life and existence it is. Like it doesn't feel like you go to like, you know, a 9 to 5 where like you're doing one thing and then like you exit and are a different person. Your magic and being a witch is just like kind of who you are. Do you ever feel torn, or is there a boundary, and what is that boundary between practice of magic, or is there even a two things?
That's yes, there are boundaries. You know, there are a lot of similarities, and obviously things are very intertwined. My practice is very personal to me, and you know, there's a lot of things that I do, like pre-show rituals. You know, that's witchcraft, but it also veers into career because it's prepping for a show. And you know, I also just do different things that I need for my own personal growth and my own journey, just as a human, never mind as an artist. So you know, there's a lot of my practice that has to just do with what I talk about in therapy, or like, you know, what I'm thinking about in any given moment. And then definitely I have built in moments where I have a little internal chant during a show, you know, right before I do a certain something in my show. I won't say what, but right before I do a certain something, I have a little like kind of prayer, I guess you could say, that I cry out in the back of my head as I'm saying my line. So it is very intertwined at the same time. But then I get off stage and I pack up my show and I go back to the hotel room and I just knit. You know, sometimes we just need a break, and there's nothing wrong with that, you know? So, but I do enjoy how intertwined it is. And I do enjoy that primary. I mean, that's why I've set it up this way, is because for me, one feeds on another, you know, they're part and parcel, and you can't really separate them. And I like that.
I mean, it seems like even in your like post-show ritual with like knitting and stuff, that's also like a form of meditation. It seems like everything you do could be kind of, I don't know, perceived as being this like lifestyle of practice. Sorry.
Oh no, I was just going to say, you know, I think yes, but with all of this, it just becomes important to not get so locked into, well, I have to do this at this time and I have to do this after this, otherwise this will happen, you know, because then it gets kind of like a little obsessive in a way that actually is counterproductive. So it's so important to refresh and continually change things up and make sure that it's organic and compelling to you, and that it's actually helping you as opposed to just stressing you out.
Absolutely. I feel like when I was like 16 and practicing Wicca, I was very like, I would try to like follow the like rules of whatever book I was reading like so intensely because I thought like something awful would happen, like I don't know, the world would split or something. Sure. But I realized like what you were saying earlier, like intuition is so powerful, and like the way that you carry yourself and like the flow of energy and stuff. So Megana has a cool question that kind of like turns from like your personal practice as a as like a witch and magician to the practice of other people and the community at large.
Yeah, so I think we touched on this a little bit, like how individuality like plays a role in like your practice, like the way that you come, the experiences you bring, the experiences the audience brings, like it's very centered around that. So it can change all the time. So what variability do you think exists among magicians and the way they practice the art form? Are there certain mainstream methods or training for this practice? And are there any practices that are deemed incorrect, fake, or unreliable? And do you appreciate this variety, or do you like that there's like a shared foundational element to the art?
Yeah, so I mean, there definitely isn't a clear-cut thing for anyone. You know, it's not like juggling where you learn 2 balls and then you learn 3 and then you learn clubs, and then there's kind of like not a clear-cut path. It very much is like about what you are interested in and what you want to do. So that's why, you know, there's so much variety in magic, but at the same time, there's a lot that's kind of just the same. And there are a lot of people who just kind of use their hack lines and they do their stock tricks. And it's kind of frustrating to me, honestly. And I write a lot about this in my Genii Magazine column, is like, if this is not actually compelling to you personally, why are we doing this way, and what is the audience getting out of this, and what is that shiny box that you have that no one can seem to associate or identify with? So, you know, I think that because people are seeking a path, they often just kind of go with what's store bought or go with what's, you know, written out for them, and they're not going to make their own script. They're just going to do the script that's written with the trick that they've, you know, bought from wherever or read from whatever book. But there are a great deal of magicians who are, you know, forging their own path and doing their own thing and creating artistic magic in a way that's like absolutely fascinating. And so I don't mean to just say all magicians are hacks. I'm not at all saying that. I'm just saying because people are seeking something easy, they can go that route. But there are so many people creating such beautiful art, and it's you know, it's a real treat to be able to experience that when you're fortunate enough to see it. There aren't a lot of specifically magic venues in the country or the world for that matter. And post-pandemic, a lot of review shows are hiring fewer acts per show. And so, you know, it's harder and harder to kind of piecemeal living together, just doing this, you know, variety art. But those who do, you know, generally are creating something very cool. And it, you know, it's very different. It's like my best friend does all high-tech magic, and he has a robot that does card tricks, and it's all iPhones and Amazon. It's crazy. It's so not me, but you know, it's like, what a beautiful route for someone to take, and it's so organic to him. It's great. But for me, like, I want to do things that barely use any props, that are pretty much all happen within the mind of the spectator and are a little witchy.
So this is going to be our last question from the panelists, and then after that, we're going to open it up to a Q&A. So if you haven't already, please put your questions into the Q&A box in the Zoom. So we're going to take it to Natalie, who has a good question that kind of like roots it back in the idea of like magic and truth and like our current political scape.
Yeah, so as we've touched upon, over the past few years, millennials and Gen Z, especially those of marginalized identities, have become more and more interested in witchcraft, magic, and the occult. A March 22 article in The Atlantic attributes this development to Donald Trump's election, as well as the Me Too movement. It quotes author and witch Pam Grossman as saying that whenever there are events that really shake the foundations of society, so the American Civil War, turmoil in pre-revolutionary Russia, the rise of Weimar Germany, people absolutely turn towards the occult. That was what Pam Grossman said. So I'm curious, given our post-truth landscape, do you see hope or danger, a bit of both maybe, in this generational shift toward witchcraft and magic as alternative ways of knowing?
Absolutely. So Pam Grossman is amazing, for the record. Her books are all phenomenal. But yes, this is very true. If you look at like the rise of spiritualism in America, which spread into Europe, that really came from people's grief after the Civil War, and they wanted to know where their loved ones had gone. And so, a lot of this, you recall that there was the whole Hex Kavanaugh, and there was Bind Donald Trump. And while generally these things weren't designed to actually work, it was more of a political statement than an actual practice of, actually trying to hex these people. But that kind of like communal awareness is so important. And again, because it's making people question, it's making people think twice about, what do I believe and why am I here and what are we doing? And, should I just continue in this late stage capitalistic patriarchal community that we are existing in, or should I try to forge something else? And so I think that inspires hope for me. That being said, you asked if there was fear. There's a little bit of fear. And I will say, because, like in QAnon, there's this whole like starseed concept of all these guys claiming to be, starseed entities. And, it's based in some kind of very, very obscure occult writing. But, they're using this occult theory to justify some very terrible things. And so I see that's problematic. Or even just if someone's like very into Norse mythology and they adhere to that and are all, focused on that, well, that can be a very easy crossover into some white supremacy thinking. And so that can also be dangerous. Or even just the fact that so much of witchcraft, especially in America, but across the world, is built on the backs of women of color and the work that they have done for all of the craft, whether it's, popularizing and working on tarot developments or, hoodoo and voodoo, and the way that all of that has infiltrated into goop witchcraft, like the kind of mainstream whitewashed witchcraft. And it's like, do you know where your Palo Santo comes from? Because that's a sacred plant, and do you know where your white sage comes from? Also a sacred. There's so many questions to ask. Was that crystal mined ethically? But when you just buy the starter pack, you don't know. And yes, as people just getting into witchcraft, there are so many more resources now than ever before, and that's a wonderful thing. But my hope would just be that as people grow in their craft, to really start to question, where is this coming from? Why am I doing X, Y, and Z? Who's telling me to do this? What is my source? Where am I reading this? Because again, at heart, that's what witchcraft is all about, that individuality.
I feel like kind of this like renaissance of like witchcraft and like honestly indigenous practices has a lot of potential to maybe like uplift those voices and like the cultures and communities that discovered and created them in the first place. And so I don't know, I think people like you who are mystics and like have this platform, like I think what you're doing is amazing, and like kind of like championing that and like pushing it forward, and having it be a part of the discussion surrounding your work. So I don't know, I have optimism with it. So I'm gonna pass.
I do too.
I love that. I'm gonna pass it along to Meghana, who is doing the Q&A portion of the Zoom. So.
Yes, okay. I'm excited to continue the conversation through the Q&A. Yeah, just a reminder, you can put in any questions, but we've already got some really great ones in there. So I'm going to start off with the one from Ian. He asked, what do you think of the likes of Darren Brown mixing psychology and mentalism and old-fashioned showmanship?
Beautiful. Darren Brown is amazing. I love Darren Brown. I just got the definitive mental mysteries of Hector Chadwick. For those, if that means anything to anyone, if there are any magicians in the group, buy that book. Darren Brown is amazing, and the way he uses hypnosis and such clever uses of. He does a little bit of pre-show, but he also does so much like on stage stooging. I mean, it's unreal that this man. I love Darren Brown. I have nothing but praise.
That's great. And I guess I'll just move on to the next one, which is, what are some challenges you face identifying as a witch, if any? I think we talked a little bit about them, but you can touch on a few again.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, there are a lot of people who are still very afraid of it. When I go, every year I do Halloween shows in Salt Lake City, and I'm not allowed to do my tarot tricks. I have to kind of tone some things down a little bit. And, I think sometimes I'm more willing to do that than others. It kind of depends on the context and the circumstance. But yeah, I mean, there are people who just like freak out and think, well, this is Satanism and this is, evil. And it's kind of like, no, it's just, I kind of want to, it's just magic tricks, a little bit of real, a little bit of not, but there's definitely some challenges for sure.
And so there's some people that are scared because they're just like intimidated by the magic. But on the flip side, there are people that, like we talked about, have the skepticism. Is it hard to make some audience believe in what you are presenting? And that's a question from Anne.
Inevitably, like I've heard people say on numerous occasions leaving my show, oh, it was all just stooges. It's like I use 9 different people, maybe more like 12 actually in the shows. I don't tour with 12 people. So yeah, I mean, sometimes you can't please everyone, and sometimes people just don't want to indulge you and want to just be, smug about whatever their beliefs are. And there's really only so much you can do about that ultimately. I mean, if they want to engage in a conversation with you, then you can explain your point a little bit better. But, I've heard so many things about so many different elements of my act from different people as you leave. And if there's something that is striking you as, oh, a lot of people are kind of criticizing this, maybe I should change it, that's one thing. But if it's just these kind of like smug one-off comments, like you just have to water off a duck's back,
And Lorraine asked, is it hard, or is there any particular trick that has taken you like longer to master than others, or any that haven't specifically worked, maybe because of that skepticism or anything?
Yes, plenty. I did a thing at one point where I had 3 different people think 3 different things based off of prompts, and it didn't work. It just didn't work. I couldn't get it to work. And after a few embarrassing shows, I have a different method for doing that now. But ultimately, that's all being replaced by a routine where I have people write down questions about themselves that they don't have the answers to, and then I answer. And that's like, I'm not even done with that. Like that is like, so there's a lot of work that goes into it. And it's a process. Hopefully I'll be able to debut it for my Halloween shows this year, but it's we'll see. I'm working on it.
We're excited for that. And I know Emma mentioned this in the introduction. I kind of wanted to come back to it. How have your philosophy studies informed your magic and witchcraft? Like, how has it helped in any way or contributed in any way that you didn't expect?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, when I was at UCLA, I was very down the rabbit hole of existentialism, and by way of Spinoza, honestly, it was kind of a roundabout entry point. But Camus' whole thing was that we should live life to the fullest, hate death, and be condemned to a meaningless task. And once you realize the absurdity of that, then you achieve a sense of freedom. And for me, witchcraft gives meaning to the meaningless tasks in a paradoxical way, kind of, the meaningless tasks we're condemned to, if you will, to follow with what Camus was saying. But, it's like I just want to live without the guilt of societal strains and doctrines and any crippling obsessions that people have with certain dogmas. And I just want to evaluate why we've been oppressed and how to break away from it. And magic and witchcraft both kind of give me an avenue to do so.
Yeah, I really like how you said that. And I think magic, and it just mixes with psychology and it mixes with a lot of other institutions that we talk about on this program. One of them is politics. And Patricia asked, do you recognize your own developed skills in mental games and politicians when they speak in public?
Well, yes, to a certain extent. They're not always as subtle about it as I am. No, I think for them, it's just basically there's a lot of equivoque and a lot of just kind of lying. And honestly, for me, I'm not, with at least what I do, I'm not lying. And I think that magic is the most honest profession because I'm saying I'm going to lie to you, and then I do. But it's really more of an honest approach. And with politics, you don't necessarily have the same honest approach, despite hoping for it.
And since we talk a lot about truth in this program, I think I should definitely go back to this question from Hannah, who couldn't be here today. Have there been any times where you felt out of control or lost in somebody else's truth instead of your own?
Oh, sure. I mean, I think, definitely growing up in magic and having different mentors and having the different mentors tell me, kind of the direction that they felt I should go into. And I just kind of went along with it, as opposed to really thinking about what is compelling to me and what I want to do. And, I think, just everyone's journey growing up from things that your parents and early developmental surroundings at that time, and everyone has an evolution, sometimes away from that, sometimes more into it. And I think that, it's easy you have to just parse away what doesn't feel right to you. And I think that's one thing that witchcraft is so good for, is it really gives you the perspective to really pick through, why are things disagreeing with me internally, and why do I resonate with certain things? And so I think that that's kind of a journey that we all really have to go through.
Mm-hmm. And you talked about picking through the brain a little bit, and you work on dissecting how the brain processes experiences. Does the brain play any role in distorting people's memory, or how reliable is memory to the reality of something that happens? What have you found in that?
Well, there are psychological subtleties known as conditioning, where, for example, I'm going to use a coin trick, which I used to do a long time ago, but you're secretly concealing a coin under a card, but the way you keep picking it up and brushing the table to clear it of dust or whatever, you're conditioning people to think that there's nothing underneath that card, when indeed there is. And so this is an example of putting in a false memory, so that way when that coin does appear there, it's so much more impressive because you're implanting this memory of there not being anything there.
Yeah, wow, that's really cool. And I think I'm going to do one last one to wrap it up. I think this was from John. Do you have any advice for aspiring magicians and witches?
Yes, I do. Read everything you can and be as critical about it as you can. There are a lot of really great magic books out there, but there are also a lot of awful magic books, and that goes for witchcraft as well. So it's about finding what resonates with you and continually checking in with yourself of, is this right for me? Does this feel good to me? Is this interesting to me? Because you should never just do something in these crafts just for the sake of doing it, because that ultimately isn't going to serve you, unless it's an exercise for something greater that you do want to achieve at some other points. Just to do something because you think you should or you're supposed to is not the best way to go about things. But really, there's some good literature out there in both. Pam Grossman for witchcraft, Amanda Yates Garcia, Juliet Diaz are all amazing witches who I really aspire to be more like. And as far as magic is concerned, You know, Darren Brown has got some great books. Hector Chadwick is wonderful. Eugene Berger is just fabulous. You know, there are so many wonderful people out there who are really analytical about things. And I think just you staying as analytical as you can is ultimately the best route.
I think that's a great way to end the program, because I think on this program we've talked a lot about being critical of the truth, about, you know, taking in a lot of truth and like kind of creating your own opinion, just always being critical, analyzing, moving forward. So I'm glad we kind of ended on that. So thank you so much to the viewers for your amazing questions, and thank you, Krystyn, for your wonderful presentation. We really appreciate you joining us today. And our next program is on Wednesday, August 24th at 4 p.m. PST with guest speaker Daniel Lee. He's the mayor of Culver City, and he will speak about truth and politics. Thank you guys so much for coming.